In the fall of 2021, Squid Game took the world by storm. Helmed by creator Hwang Dong-hyuk and backed by Netflix, Squid Game released to universal critical acclaim and managed to captivate audiences even outside of its country of origin, South Korea, despite other nations having to watch it with subtitles. Through its captivating premise, character-driven narrative, and universal themes that could appeal to everyone, Squid Game was able to break through cultural barriers and become the #1 most watched show in almost 100 countries. Since then, it's been crowned Netflix's most watched TV show of all time, based on its first 4 weeks of viewership. Netflix, of course, hasn't taken this lightly, as they've already confirmed a Squid Game Season 2, and are even in talks with Dong-hyuk to make a Squid Game cinematic universe. This begs the question, exactly how did Squid Game become so popular? If the show had been released even as soon as 10 years ago, I don't think it would have seen the monumental success that it did. Korean content hasn't always been as ubiquitous in the United States, for example, but Korean exports, such as Squid Game and BTS, have become just as synonymous around the world as Breaking Bad in one direction. With this video, I want to figure out why the US, and by extension, the rest of the world, have become so infatuated with Korean content. What was it about the show itself that resonated with so many people, letting it become the most watched TV show of all time? I welcome you all to how Squid Game managed to take over the world. Squid Game is about a desperately indebted group of people who are tricked into a tournament of deadly children's games with the prospect of winning 45.6 billion won. The event itself is presented with the freedom of choice, as the participants are allowed to vote in favor of ending the Squid Game, and at one point they actually do, but after going back to their debt-ridden, hopeless lives, they choose to return for a chance to live debt-free. Its protagonist, Gi-Hun, is a down-on-his-luck, deadbeat father who just can't seem to catch a break. He is divorced, his mother is sick, and his former wife is about to take their daughter away to the United States. The threat of the latter is what convinces him to return back to the Squid Game. During the first event, of red light, green light, he actually recognizes another participant, being his childhood friend, Chung Sang-woo. This is surprising to him, considering Sang-woo appeared to be someone who was well off and set up for success, and despite that, he's still here, participating in the Squid Game, making various friends along the way. Gi-Hun is remarkable in the sense that despite the circumstances, he is always willing to help others, and is generally optimistic. He more often than not puts others ahead of himself, and only resorts to foul play when there is no other option, and even then, his guilty conscience still gets the best of him. After being presented with a certain decision later in the series, where he's essentially presented with victory, he decides to refuse it, not wanting to stoop so low and appeal to the deranged individuals who organized the Squid Game. With all that being said, I think the reason Squid Game blew up like it did and resonated with so many people was because of 5 main factors, the first of which being the medium itself it was released through, Netflix. Unlike the Netflix of today, which has recently announced that they have lost almost 1 million subscribers, Netflix used to be universally loved as an online streaming giant. Despite having seemingly reached their peak, Netflix is still at the head of the pack when it comes to online streaming. While other streaming services are swiftly managing to catch up, Netflix has still had a huge lead in terms of when they were established, their various offerings of original content, and their general watch time. So much so that at any given time, Netflix accounts for 15% of all internet traffic globally. And speaking of the global market, Netflix is by far the most popular streaming service worldwide. And this is no coincidence, considering how much of an emphasis they have placed on bringing foreign language content to the platform in the past 10 years. After taking note of the long since blossoming Korean entertainment industry, Netflix began investing in the territory, spending $700 million in investing in Korean content from years 2015 to 2020. Since then, in only 2 years, Netflix has already spent a record-breaking $500 million investing in more South Korea-based productions. This is estimated to account for half of Netflix's spending on content in the Asia-Pacific region, and considering how much leverage South Korean content has had over both the East and West since the 1990s, I'd say that this could most definitely be considered a fruitful venture. And the still ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, forcing people to quarantine and stay indoors, has only bolstered the amount of people streaming online video, and has exponentially boosted Netflix's series viewership. And all of this would culminate into an almost perfect storm with the release of Squid Game on September 17th, 2021. There's just something so intriguing about the name, Squid Game. Of course, if you've seen the show, are of Korean descent, or even grew up in South Korea yourself, you know that the Squid Game is an actual game played among children there. So if you belong in either of those two latter groups, that in itself could key you in onto the show. At least for me, the name Squid Game itself invoked a lot of feelings for me personally. Obviously, it reminded me of the Hunger Games and other Battle Royale inspired franchises, of people being forced to kill one another, evoking scenes of violence, murder, etc. But the Squid Game name also sounded childlike in nature, like I alluded to before. And from the little advertisement I had seen prior to watching the series, and the little I knew about K-dramas, I thought the show was just some kind of reality show competition. I would have never imagined it would include scenes as graphic and violent as this. which is all but another reason why I think the show managed to obsess audiences.
So there's this show on Netflix called Squid Game. Almost all of the entertainment value is in watching people be mutilated and killed in all of these gory and graphic ways.
Graphic scenes like this, or all of the violence depicted in Squid Game, was actually one of the show's sticking points. This is obviously a gross oversimplification of the show, willfully ignoring what it's actually about, but this sentiment about the show's violence was actually much more common than I initially thought, even being something believed by a lot of people in South Korea itself. This is most likely because Squid Game is very much unlike a traditional K-drama. Compared to the all-time classics, such as Autumn in My Heart, My Sassy Girl, and Winter Sonata, Squid Game lacks many typical K-drama mainstays. There is not much romance, its overall tone is much more bleak, and violence and gore are prevalent throughout its entire runtime. While K-dramas have recently, relatively speaking, begun to branch out into more different genres, those three previously mentioned series are still very much treated as the norm. They lack any semblance of gore, and didn't have a gargantuan budget. While yes, Squid Game is a K-drama by technicality, Squid Game pushed the barrier in so many ways that even reception for it in its own country was somewhat lukewarm, reviewing only slightly above average among local critics. Many conservative outlets especially didn't like how the show seemingly highlighted the more negative aspects of South Korean life and society. This, however, didn't stop the Korean press from endlessly writing about the series, obsessively debating as to why the show was received so positively internationally. Like Parasite before it, a film covering similar subject matter, and as well becoming similarly popular even outside of South Korea, the violence within Squid Game is expertly woven into its narrative, and not used solely for the purpose of shock value. This violence, however, isn't explicitly shown until quite far into episode 1, Red Light, Green Light. In terms of streaming, TV show pilots are a lost art. If your show's on Netflix, it's already assumed that it's been picked up and filmed, but nonetheless, shows on Netflix still need to have a riveting first episode in order to hook the viewer and get them to binge the rest of the season. That is their entire business model after all. I liked Squid Game's first episode and loved the entire show as a whole, but while first watching it, I didn't know for sure if I was going to continue until a certain moment in episode 1. Prior to the first event, a red light, green light, things felt a bit jovial. Sure, there was a bit of tension between Han-mi-neo and Kang-sang-byeok, but that exchange only occurred because they seemed to already have history outside of the Squid Game. Even after the Red Soldiers came out and told everyone why they're here, most of the characters seemed rather optimistic. See here in this scene, where this character's having fun trying to take a portrait. Gi-Hun, the protagonist of Squid Game, even cracks a smile when prompted, showing off more of his personality and how exciting the prospect of the Squid Game is for him. Even after the start of Red Light, Green Light, where one player is eliminated for moving after the phrase red light, his friend and the other participants don't even think he's dead. His friend says something along the lines of, "Stop playing around," only to see his friend puke up blood, prompting him to run away and to also be eliminated. This in turn causes everyone to go up into a panic, resulting in literal hundreds of participants being shot and killed. Up until now, the gravitas of the Squid Game hadn't been made clear yet, considering no one knew the actual consequences of being eliminated. What follows is what I think is one of the most memorable, iconic moments of the show, being a montage of the remaining participants being killed to the tune of Fly Me to the Moon. It's full of fantastic moments of tension, painstaking close-ups, and a moment even highlighting another fan favorite character. This scene leaves a lasting impression on the viewer even after they finish watching it, which I felt was akin to one of the final scenes in Parasite. All this violence most definitely turned off some viewers, but for others, I'm sure it got them even more invested into the show, causing Squid Game to become even more popular through word of mouth. And even in spite of Squid Game's violence, the show somehow even became popular among children. When the show came out, all over social media, you'd see children reenacting scenes from the show, gleefully playing dead when they were eliminated. When children are told they're not allowed to watch something, that makes them even more curious about it. The violence within Squid Game got even its detractors talking about it, ensuring that it would stay in the minds of Netflix subscribers for years to come. After Squid Game became the global phenomenon that it did, you'd expect its creator, Hwang Dong-hyuk, to be extraordinarily well off considering he created one of the most popular TV shows of all time. But this couldn't be further from the case. "I'm not rich," says Dong-hyuk, "and it's not like Netflix is paying me a bonus. Netflix paid me according to the original contract, but I do have enough. I have enough to put food on the table." Leaked documents obtained by Bloomberg show that Netflix estimates Squid Game generated around 900 million USD, while only costing 21.4 million USD to produce. This is all quite ironic considering Squid Game, like Parasite before it, could be perceived as a 9-hour-long critique on capitalism in itself. Capitalism is immensely problematic wherever it is practiced, but South Korea especially has something of an anti-labor reputation, with only 10% of its workers in unions and laws limiting unions from negotiating pay, among other restrictions. Being overworked in South Korea is so common that there's actually a word for it, karosa, a fate all too unfortunately common among delivery workers in South Korea, who have been forced to work ridiculously hard to keep the nation afloat during the COVID-19 pandemic. All the while, those within chaebols and the upper class live comfortably, while the middle and lower classes work tirelessly to make ends meet in and out of a pandemic. The Squid Game within, well, Squid Game could not exist without the force of capitalism subjecting extreme financial duress within its world in order to create its pool of desperate players, and the upper class within Squid Game would involve a certain character and its various VIPs. One of the major revelations within Squid Game is that the game itself has actually been going on for decades, featuring thousands of participants over the years. It's learned that the character Oh Nam, a participant of the Squid Game, who had become good friends with Gi-Hun over the course of it, was actually behind it the entire time. Oh Nam was apparently an incredibly wealthy business tycoon who created the Squid Game with a group of friends after becoming bored with their lives and wealth. This revelation gave us insight on the ideology of the ruling class within Squid Game. It's no coincidence that the various VIPs in the show, the people who come join the frontman in order to spectate it, are all English-speaking, Western white men. While they spectate the Squid Game, they disrespect the service staff, are shown eating like pigs, and even bet on participants, which parallels Gi-Hun and his friend previously betting on horse races. In one of Gi-Hun and Il-nam's final conversations, Il-nam attempts to justify his actions, insisting that everyone was there on their own volition. While this may be true, this is most definitely a logical fallacy. Sure, participating in the Squid Game was their choice, but what free will can there be for people who owe millions, with families at home to care for, and creditors at their back? When someone comes along and offers a solution, even a dangerous one, anyone who has taken a dodgy job offer to get away from a worse one, or because they're unemployed and their rent and college loans are due, knows that there is a limit to how truly free our choices can be when we need money, especially if there's little to no safety net. And considering Il-nam was born into wealth, it's no surprise that he doesn't think this is the case. Like Il-nam, the frontman also insists that the Squid Game is fair. This is another aspect of capitalism that rings all throughout the show. Like capitalism, there are many ways that the system is clearly rigged, no matter what the people at the top insist. There's a moment in a later episode during the glass tile event where a participant essentially figures out which tiles are the real glass that you can step on to proceed and which are the fake ones that will shatter when too much weight is placed onto them. When the frontman and VIPs notice this, something that could actually help the participants of the Squid Game, as to make things more entertaining and not to mess with their own bets, the frontman chooses to dim the lights so that he could no longer tell the difference between the two tiles. The frontman's insistence on fairness has nothing to do with the actual value of equality, but rather the capitalists need to ensure that the rich are happy with the stakes and their chance at a favorable outcome. Exemplified perfectly with when the VIPs dim the lights during the glass event because their own money was at stake. By the end of the Squid Game, against all odds, Gi-Hun and his childhood friend, Cho Sang-woo, are the only participants left alive. They have to play an actual game of Squid Game, and after a grueling scene when the two are armed with knives and are forced to fight, Gi-Hun is able to best Sang-woo, but he can't bring himself to kill him. Remembering back to when they were told the rules of the Squid Game, Gi-Hun proposes to end the game, which they should be allowed to do if the majority agrees. This in turn bewilders the VIPs that are spectating, as under capitalism, this incredibly rich group of men do not understand how one could come so close to receiving so much money and choose not to take it, even if it involved killing a childhood best friend. Sang-woo begins to recount his childhood and his mother, and in a final act of selflessness, grabs the knife and stabs himself so that Gi-Hun can win, without living with the guilt of knowing that he killed his own best friend. Through the perfect storm that was the backing of Netflix, the world's ongoing disposition to Korean content, and the nuance of the series itself, Squid Game was able to permanently cement South Korean content into the hearts and minds of people all around the world. Through its creative premise, relatable characters, and interesting subject matter, creator Dong-hyuk was able to make what was seemingly a distinctly Korean story a universal one. As shown throughout history, from Sweetie to Parasite, South Korean filmmakers are incredibly willing to address social issues within their own nation, and because of this, their output is rife with subtext and social commentary. In 2019, Parasite gave us a glimpse as to what this worldwide popularity of what a Korean film or TV show would look like, and because of it, now more than ever, global audiences are willing to consume content not dubbed in their own language. When you leap over the 1-inch tall barrier that is subtitles, you'll be introduced to a whole new world of amazing, cerebral works of film, and by extension, television. This has been NOLOAF. Till next time.